when the province is willing to put a pastor in prison for having church in a freaking tent, give me a break.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, 90 days and $20,000 fine for me, and $5,000 fine for my wife, $5,000 fine for Cody, my associate, $5,000 for our kids pastor, and $35,000 for our church.
Pastor Phil Hutchings still faces jail time in New Brunswick. He's back in court this week. Today, I'm bringing you an interview I recorded with him before Christmas, where he discusses why he refuses to stop giving Sunday services and what sort of legal trouble he's still in.
Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Do you know the story of Pastor Phil Hutchings and his Tabernacle Community Church in St. John, New Brunswick? This is such a crazy story. Pastor Phil came under police surveillance at his home and at his church after he refused to force his congregation to comply with the COVID lockdown in his province. Now, that lockdown was very onerous. It entails masks, social distancing, attendance limits, contact tracing right down to the pew in which the congregant sits, encouraging vaccination, and no singing. Phil and his associate pastor Cody Butler work for God and for their congregation, and not for New Brunswick's Ministry of Public Safety. So the pair didn't act like police from upon the pulpit. And for their stance, Cody was arrested giving Thanksgiving services. Phil's home and church were under constant police presence, and Phil then was summoned to court and then taken directly into custody for over a week. Again, the crimes here, refusing to act as police for the government inside the church. Now, the Democracy Fund, through your generous crowdfunding donations, was able to get Pastor Phil and his family and his church all the help that they need through a very special website that we set up to help, savepastorphil.com. Now, Phil is such an enthusiastic and optimistic advocate for religious freedom. His hope for a better church, a better country, and a better tomorrow, it's infectious. Really, it's exactly what the doctor ordered as we go into 2022, which seems a lot like 2021 redux. So here's an interview I did with Pastor Phil just before Christmas. And I should tell you that this week, Pastor Phil is back in court with his legal team, paid for through your donations to savepastorphil.com. That legal help will be with him every step of the way. So let's fill up with some of Phil's optimism here. Phil, can you give us an update about what happened in court?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So basically, the judge said to work out with public safety how many walls we can have with our tent. They were calling our tent an indoor venue because it has walls. And I said, well, actually, it's a canvas top with 4 drapes, but okay. And so we emailed public safety and wanted to work with them. So how many walls can we have up for Sunday? And they have no interest in working with us. They said, we are anticipating your question. And they said, you can have no walls and you can have no roof. I said, oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for working with the church. I appreciate you. And so, we just went outside and we just had church and people came and it was awesome. It was awesome. And I shared a message of hope and, I shared Christ and we prayed with folks. We had communion, we had pop and worship and praise music and people were just encouraged. We had a food truck lunch. Come on. When you have a food truck lunch and Jesus, that's revival. So we had that and it was just awesome. People had great attitudes. It was cold, but people were on fire, if that makes any sense. So I was encouraged. Their faith inspires me. I'm excited for what God's doing in St. John, and not only across our country, obviously, but in our province, in our in New Brunswick. And so we're just going to keep having outdoor services until we appeal these things. No roof. Okay. We're still going to have church. So that's kind of the update. Sad, but it's not going to get us down.
We're Christians, or the early church was in the caves. So this is not unusual to us. This is just going back to our roots. So with regard to the church building, Do you have any idea when you can get access to it again?
I can have access I can have access to it right now. I just don't want to go in and force people to have church the way the government sees fit. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. There's a mandate we follow called the Bible. And for me, I can't do that. And it has nothing to do with me or pride or upping it to the government. It's none of that is on the table. Oh my gosh. It's just, I hold to a standard that I find in scripture. And so, until those mandatory orders break, I'm not going back in.
Well, and restrictions are changing all the time. And then we have the new Omicron variant. So we don't know how the government's going to overreact with that. So I guess this is your way of keeping your church worship free of government overreach. But you are still personally in a fair bit of trouble. We're doing our best to get you out of that. But, the government, it's my understanding they want 90 days in jail for you.
90 days in jail. See, I'm trying, but they just find something, throw you in contempt. Find something, throw you in contempt. Change something, throw you in contempt. They're upset because I'm not complying. And so it has nothing to do with public safety. That's obvious. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. If they're watching, I'm sure they are. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It's just, this isn't about COVID anymore. Right. When the province, listen, I'm going to get so angry. When the province is willing to put a pastor in prison for having church in a freaking tent, 90 days and $20,000 fine for me, and $5,000 fine for my wife, $5,000 fine for Cody, my associate, $5,000 for our kids pastor, and $35,000 for a church. This is baloney.
From what I understand, they also want to make you pay for your own persecution. They want costs awarded to them, but from you, for the cost of pursuing these contempt-related persecution charges against you.
I honestly don't know where the hit is. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but this is unreasonable. I even saw that the courts or the province said that we were selling church merchandise to personally profit over contempt fines, which is, they're pulling this right out of the air. It's a lie. How can you? And then CBC obviously loves that, right? I mean, any opportunity to hit the church with, defamation, let's, come on. This is insanity. First of all, why don't you take the time, dear province, to actually know what we're doing? First of all, I sell those shirts at cost. Fact. Number two, all the money that comes in, we use it to help the homeless. It's absolutely insanity. So, we have a team that goes out every Saturday night and we clothe the naked and we feed the hungry. When they come at us, they're cutting off their own hand. They don't even realize it. We're on the same, we're trying to help our city. You know what? It's so weird. It's like some sort of crazy, I'm just waiting for somebody to pinch me and wake me up. It's like, no, this is reality, but we will win. And I'll tell you what, God can only let himself be poked and prodded for so long before he responds. So I pray for the judge. I pray for our public safety, through my eye twitching, but I pray for them because, honestly, how blinded can you be? I don't want them to, anyway, it's craziness.
Phil, I want to ask you, are you ready to go to jail for 90 days? Can you do 90 days?
I won't go to jail for 90 days. I just know I won't. I felt like they have, they have no ground for contempt. Our lawyer is, he is on it, like white on rice. He's like, an assassin, he just knows how to, he's very wise. God's using him and not for me, but this is precedent setting. And people will take the lead from this. And so I'm really encouraged. But there's no ground to put me in. If they throw me in jail, it's going to get overturned. It's just crazy.
Phil, I love your infectious optimism when you spoke at the Democracy Fund's Faith and Freedom event. That was one of my big takeaways was, in spite of the darkness, you are just so optimistic for this country and for the state of the church and for the state of civil liberties in Canada. And there's a real lesson there. I'm so glad that your lawyer, who's being paid for through generous donations to the Democracy Fund, is doing a great job for you, and you feel like he's the right guy for you. One last thing before I go. Do you have a message for people out there who may be demoralized as governments across the country are saying, don't have Christmas, don't do this? Do you have a message for them? Because they're watching you and they're cheering for you. So what do you have to say to them?
I know things look crazy, but it's usually at the most craziest, darkest hour we can see a change for the better. So don't let up. Keep the hammer down. Listen, it's going to be your best Christmas you ever had. And 2022 is going to be a Psalm 37 year. For you folks that are watching, and even Sheila, you got to read it. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but Psalm 37, I really feel it's going to be a Psalm 37 year where we're going to see things shift that we thought could never change. I really do.
What is wrong with the province of New Brunswick that they would treat somebody like Pastor Phil like he's an active shooter event? You can feel Phil's love of his community and his country and God right through your screen. Phil not only takes care of his congregation, but he takes care of the least of his brothers in St. John. He's a frontline worker, is he not? I'm so glad that Phil has trusted us to tell his story and to get it right, but also that he's trusted the lawyers who work with the Democracy Fund to take care of him, his congregation, and his family, because boy, they need all the help that they can get. They're up against the full force and all the resources of the government. Now, if you would like to help Phil as he's dragged back to court for the crime of being a pastor who chooses to obey God when the orders of the government conflict with what God commands him to do, please visit savepastorphil.com and make a donation. Because of that partnership with the Democracy Fund, all donations there qualify for a charitable tax receipt. And thank you to everybody who has donated. We could not do any of this without you. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. If you would like to make a donation to support Pastor Phil in his fight for religious freedom against the New Brunswick government, please visit savepastorphil.com. And through an important partnership with the Democracy Fund, all donations there now qualify for a charitable tax receipt.